Security agents foil another suicide attack as Chief of Army Staff solicits assistance of United Nations to completely demine Borno State.
War against corruption will not stop despite strong resistance, presidency insists.
Establishment of Development Bank of Nigeria, time for small and medium enterprises to thrive.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, our focus is on handling recovered loot.
Well, now, the federal government in June last year precisely announced that 78 billion naira, $182 million, and about 3.5 million pounds and 11,000 euros were recovered from different sources within the first year of the Buhari administration. I think, Kingsley, that's quite a lot.
Absolutely, Rhoda. Now, the government has also continued to update Nigerians on such discoveries and recoveries, as well as assets forfeited or seized from persons alleged to have raided the public treasury.
And of course, the introduction of the whistleblower policy aimed at encouraging citizens to disclose corrupt practices yielded immediate results as more funds and assets were reported to have been recovered through such disclosures and, of course, such tip-offs.
All right. Now, we have also seen that the federal government, of course, is continuing with disclosures as to some that have been recovered with particular regard in recent times, of course, to the on account of the introduction of the whistleblower policy. Now, in February this year, it said that it had recovered some $151 million and 8 billion naira said to have been looted from three sources, according to the information provided by the Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed. Now, he also said that those disclosures, of course, did not include the $9.2 million in cash, reportedly also owned by a former GMD, that's the Group Managing Director of the NNPC. And, of course, the amount, according to the stories, was recovered from some building in a low-income part of Kaduna.
Well, while the whistleblower policy is yet to be legally formalized through legislation from the National Assembly, the policy is set to be doing the magic as more people with information of wrongdoings continue to pass on such information to relevant authorities.
Now, there have also been announcements, as we said, with regard to the federal government and about bilateral and multilateral agreements with other countries and agencies, in addition, of course, to the international community, to have such funds that were salted away in various havens abroad to be released to the country.
Well, as much as this news is sweet and welcomed by all Nigerians, many voices are raising questions as to how these funds will be handled. What is the exact amount recovered? How much is forfeited? How much is being contended in courts? How will the funds be utilized? When will the public feel the impact of the recovered loot? These are some of the questions those who know will provide answers to. And our discussion today, handling recovered loots, that's looted funds, on Good Morning Nigeria today. And we are live on Nigeria's largest television network, the NTA. I'm Rhoda Albo. You're welcome to the program.
All right, Rhoda, thank you very much. Of course, we should just say recovered loot, because funds, of course, relates to monies. And we have seen also in the past year or more properties, landed properties that have also been seized or forfeited, either by way of interim orders, or final orders.
Well, we've even had, jewelries.
Absolutely. So it's not just a question of raw cash or cash in, at bank and so on and so forth. So we have all kinds of assets. So these assets are either liquid or illiquid, and monies that have been recovered over time. How, as Rhoda indicated, how are such funds being utilized? Who is in custody of the funds? What's happening to the funds, and when are we likely to see the impact of the recovery of the nation's economy? My name is Kingsley Osadolo, and I join my colleague Rhoda Albo in welcoming you to this edition of the program. Of course, it's the first of the program for the week, and in the course of the program, as always, we'll have our regular companion segments, including newspaper review, business and sports. Busy weekend, of course, for sports, and possibly also we'll go to the weather center. Let's go over now to the newsroom, and our guide is Anne Jibuno. Hi, Anne.
Hello, Kingsley and Rhoda. Good morning. Here's the news. 2 male suicide bombers have detonated IEDs strapped to their bodies at a fuel station in Mina Garage area, Maiduguri, Borno State. The 2 suicide bombers died on the spot, while a truck was partly damaged. Also at Kazuma village in Jere local government area, a suicide bomber detonated an IED, killing himself, while 1 person was injured. Similarly, a female suicide bomber with an IED strapped to her body attempted to infiltrate a wedding ceremony at Belbelo community. She was intercepted by a watchdog, but she detonated the IED, killing herself and the watchdog. A statement by the police says no other casualty was recorded and normalcy has since been restored. Nigeria requires assistance from the United Nations to completely demine the entire Sambisa forest in Borno State. The Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Tukur Buratai, said this during an interactive session with journalists in Maiduguri, the Borno State capital.
Civilian efforts through the UN may be required, just the way they are supporting humanitarian efforts by bringing relief to the affected IDPs.
Well, the presidency has given assurances that the war against perfidy and corruption by the President Muhammadu Buhari administration will not stop, despite the strong resistance of the opposition and their actions to thwart the government's efforts every day. A presidential spokesman, Garba Shehu, said in a radio program, Hanu Dayawa, on FRCN Kaduna at the weekend, he argued that the president declared rooting out corruption as one of the cardinal policies of his election campaign. To keep that thrust of ordinary Nigerians who voted him into the office, he has vowed to give corruption a good fight. Malam Garba admitted that so far, the battle to uproot corruption from Nigeria has not been easy. He dismissed rumors that members of the governing party, the All Progressives Congress, APC, were being spared, saying that all are equal before the law. Highlighting the various measures introduced to promote transparency by the present administration, Malam Shehu disclosed that upon directives by the president, the National Hajj Commission carried out an audit of accommodation agents in both Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia, and as a result, a saving of more than $16 million is being made by the intending pilgrims this year. He commended ordinary citizens for embracing the whistleblower policy by taking extraordinary risks to expose corruption. Malam Garba Shehu said 3 of the major projects very dear to the president, which he is determined to execute, are the Mambila Power Project, the Lagos-Kano, Lagos-Calabar and Port Harcourt-Maiduguri Railway Modernization projects. Others include the new presidential initiative on fertilizer, which he said is already making an impact by cutting the price of fertilizer to about 50%. President Muhammadu Buhari has congratulated multi-talented entertainer and gospel music maestro, evangelist Ebenezer Fabiyi Obe, on his 75th birthday, which is today. A statement by the special advisor to the president on media and publicity, Femi Adesina, says President Buhari describes Chief Commander Ebenezer Fabiyi Obe as a household name in Nigeria and even beyond. He says, through music, Chief Obe has flown the flag of Nigeria proudly in many nations of the world, adding that he is a veritable ambassador of our motherland. The president says Nigerians rejoice with the septuagenarian at this auspicious moment, while praying that God will grant him more years of service to the nation and humanity. Nasarawa State is benefiting from the National Integrated Power Project, stepping down high-capacity transmission line in Lafia. the state capital, to boost electricity supply. Joshua Ojito reports that the team of contractors and engineers have swung into action.
We want to assure you that this project will be delivered on time.
I want to assure you by the time this project is completed, especially with the multiple approach we are giving to this project, I believe you are going to give the entire citizens of Nasarawa State a sigh of big relief.
For Africa to achieve its 2024 Science, Technology and Innovations agenda, governments must pursue new funding alliances with the private sector for investment in human and institutional capacities development. This is part of recommendations contained in the 2017 African Capacity Report on Science and Technology and Innovations.
We produce a lot of the research publications, but many of those publications don't necessarily translate into technology that can be used or things that have value for the development of the economy.
We now know in the agricultural sector what the shortfall is. In other industries, we know what the shortfalls are. And then we will now begin to tailor our training opportunities to direct people to where those opportunities lie.
Economic activities at the Calabar Seaport have continued to remain at its lowest ebb despite government's concession of the seaport. Members of the post-privatization monitoring team of the Bureau of Public Enterprises, BPE, who on a routine assessment of the port decried non-utilization of the potential of the facility.
With this idea of having 3 channel managements. But today, the Lagos channel management is working, the Bonny channel management is working. It's only the Calabar channel management that is not working. It's all intertwined with one problem or the other.
Concessionaire is holding on and looking up to government to maintain the spirit of the concession, which federal government had said they were going to do the dredging. And so he is not investing because he's waiting on federal government to honor her obligation. Federal government has awarded a contract for the dredging to commence. We expect also that federal government will continue with this dredging.
Nigeria's Minister of Finance, Kemi Adeosun, says the Development Bank of Nigeria, DBN, is designed to mobilize capital and provide sustainable financing for small and medium enterprises to thrive in the country. Unveiling the managing director of the bank, Tony Okpanachi, to the media, the minister assured Nigerians that the bank will be a low-risk lender to microfinance banks devoid of government interference. Well, that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Rhoda and Kingsley after this break.
Explosion or gunshots of an active shooter. That might be a terror attack. At such times, always remember 3 action words. Run, hide, report. Don't try to run towards the terror scene to save the situation, because there might be a second bomb blast or another attack. Run far away and take cover. Make sure you are safe first. Yes, it is in our nature to sympathize over the hurt, but remember, only trained personnel can help in such situations. When in a secured environment, promptly call relevant authorities and help will come. For anonymous reporting, call 09630-3250-5 or 0813-2222-106. If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
The Imo Emergency Response Center was built by the Rescue Mission Team, led by Governor Rochas. It serves to provide efficient and immediate care to the critically ill and injured within the Owerri area. The Imo Emergency Response Center is well equipped to ensure that all patients get proper care before being transported to a hospital. The Emergency Response Center was deemed necessary because every life matters. The Imo Rescue Mission. Imo must be better.
Cadbury Bournvita now comes in an attractive new 500-gram refill pack. Simply open and reseal after use to retain the chocolatey and creamy taste. Cadbury Bournvita. Prepare to win.
In Nigeria, there is one sound we need to silence. So let's silence toothache before it starts with Oral-B All-Round Protection. Its advanced technology helps prevent both tooth holes and gum problems that can lead to tooth loss. It strengthens your teeth, giving them all-round protection. Because the only sound we really want to hear is that of our future. For healthier, stronger teeth in 1 week.
All right, welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the NTA. Now, talking business, financial regulators seek new approach to simplify access to loan to aid growth of micro, small and medium enterprises. That's the SMEs in Nigeria. Let's get more details from our business news correspondent, Joy Uzo.
A strong focus on macroeconomic stability has been at the forefront of recent efforts to modernize and improve Nigeria's ailing economy. In this regard, access to credit facility for micro, small and medium enterprises, MSMEs, is receiving a continuous boost from relevant authorities by the day. The diversification drive of the present administration is also opening up new opportunities and programs to create an enabling environment for businesses to grow. The Minister of Finance, Kemi Adeosun, who recently unveiled the Managing Director of the Development Bank of Nigeria, Tony Okwanachi, to the media, said the SMEs constitute 45% of Nigeria's GDP, but a major constraint to their growth is access to credit, as only about 10% of them have access to loans. She, however, assured that the Development Bank of Nigeria will bridge the gap to increase funding.
What we found is that sector have lower capital, they have higher costs, and yet they're surviving. So if we're able to give them cheaper money, longer term money, better access to money, they can really grow, and they are the engine of the economy.
Acting Managing Director, Bank of Industry, Waheed Olagunju, in a recent interview with NTA Business News, said the bank's focus is to keep working on their operational strategies in such a way that MSMEs will progressively continue to account for a significant percentage of the nation's exposure. Olagunju said, for instance, in 2014, the annual lending to MSMEs was about 1.8 billion naira per annum. But in 2015, they increased to 5.6 billion naira, which was an increase of 205%. In 2016, they increased again by 42% to 8 billion naira per annum.
Our target is to ensure that MSMEs account for 30% of the bank's risk assets by 2019. And based on our commodity-based industrialization strategy, we believe that viable enterprises can be promoted in each of the local governments that we have in the country, taking into account areas in which they have comparative advantage. So that's why we're investing heavily in communications and partnership to draw the attention of Nigerians to the business opportunities that they have in their respective environments. Because a number of opportunities exist, but many Nigerians are not aware.
As government and other relevant authorities work to reposition businesses for more viable and sustainable growth, one concern that operators have always pointed out is the need for a solution to the rising cases of multiple taxation in Nigeria. This is as a result of its negative impact on the growth of businesses. Meanwhile, equities market closed Friday, March the 31st on a negative note as the NSE All-Share Index depreciated by 0.07% to close at 25,516.34 basis points, as against 1.05% appreciation recorded previously. Next is a graphic summary of trades on the floor of the exchange. With Business News, I am Joy Uzo.
Joy Uzo, thank you very much there for the business package. Next for us, we'll take a look at the front pages of some of today's newspapers.
All right, it's time now for us to take a look at some of the dailies this morning. And our regular newspaper reviewer, Bayo Toyibi, is in the studio. Bayo, good morning.
Good morning,
you had a great
How was your weekend?
Awesome.
Good. Kingsley, how was yours? Good morning.
That was great. And you too?
Yes, I rested very well. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right. Now let's take a look at the front page of the Nigerian pilot, which is the first part we are taking a look at this morning. Nigerian pilot, immediately below the nameplate, says CBN vows to sustain foreign exchange liquidity. Details of that story can be found on page 5 and on page 46. Recession deals big blow to Benin Republic. And the lead story says with a kicker, inside Governor Bello's Kogi, workers' angst against government rises. Party members, indigents angry, and insecurity reigns. Meningitis scourge worsens. That's, of course, the story from other parts of the country. Details of that can be found on page 5. Now, below that headline on meningitis, we have a window of other headlines. Will probe Shell's planned relocation? That's according to Speaker Dogara. And 310 billion naira was never stolen from my house. Saraki. Legislature executive rift. APC to meet Senate caucus tomorrow. And group hits at Ekweremadu and Senate over Magu's confirmation. And Dixon, that's Bayelsa governor, introduces compulsory education levy in Bayelsa.
And the next paper for us is the Daily Trust. On the Daily Trust, just below the nameplate, you see there, Trust economist wants quick implementation of federal government's recovery plan. And below that is the lead story on the Daily Trust this morning. Concerns over safe drinking water as waterborne diseases ravage communities. Concerns over safe drinking water as waterborne diseases ravage communities. That's the rider there. And now let's go to the footer of the paper. Just below the foot of the paper, you see there, how corruption is fighting back, says presidency. That's stories on page 3. And page 4, dog falls suicide bomb attack at a wedding event. And finally, on page 39, presidency, Senate rift, APC meets Senate caucus tomorrow. Those are the stories trending on the Daily Trust this morning. All right, Bayo, let's get your views on this.
Let's start with the meningitis case. Federal government says it has directed all its federal medical facilities and primary health centers to take care of all cases of meningitis free of charge. People are advised to seek early attention when they feel discomforted with any of the symptoms, and these include headache, high fever, vomiting, confusion, and stiffening of the neck. The federal government is to convene a all stakeholders meeting today, which will involve members of the World Health Organization, UNICEF, as well as eHealth Africa. This is to facilitate the acquisition of more vaccines for meningitis. Nigeria is part of the West Africa meningitis belt, and annually there is meningitis vaccination carried out to stem any spread or occurrence of disease. However, the vaccination carried out was for meningitis serotype A, but the current outbreak, which is ravaging so far about 15 states, is of serotype C, and therefore the vaccines had not been available. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has sent about 800,000 doses of the vaccine. The United Kingdom is also sending another 500,000. The new states that have been reported of cases of meningitis include Lagos, Plateau, Nasarawa, also, and Cross River States. Of course, we all remember that it started from Zamfara, where it spread to Kebbi, Sokoto, Niger, FCT, and so far it has also touched Taraba, Katsina, Niger, and FCT also.
All right, Bayo, thanks. Let's go over now to the Authority newspaper. The front page of the Authority newspaper is next for us. Just above the nameplate says protests hit Okpara Varsity over the listing of programs. That's on page 4. And Southeast governors to wade into Nnamdi Kanu's detention. That's also on page 4. And fundraising video jingle. That's the kicker. Can protest DSS detention of Dogoyaro, Lemo, and others. That's on page 10 in greater detail. This story, of course, has a kicker. Executive legislative face-off. Ben Obi calls for intervention of eminent persons. Two riders warns of imminent danger to democracy and accuses APC of political inexperience.
And now on the leadership, just below the nameplates, the external reserves gained $4.45 billion in 2017, and that's the first quarter. Below that also, 310 million naira was never stolen from my house, says Saraki. That's a story that's on page 6 of the leadership this morning. And also below that, CBN vows to sustain forex liquidity. That story is on page 32. And the headline on the big story, of course, on leadership this morning, 58 insurance firms generate 2.1 trillion gross premium, where the rider pays 549 billion naira claims to Nigerians. And beside the picture story, APC wades into legislature executive rifts meets Senate caucus tomorrow. And finally, why we spent 2.2 billion naira on fertilizer. That's a statement there credited to the governor of Taraba State.
Well, let's start with the story about corruption. The presidency says those who illicit ways of accumulating money have been stopped by the war against corruption are seriously fighting back. The special assistant to the president on media, Garba Shehu, said that corruption war have found accomplices who are in form of making forms and guises and taking back the war against corruption. He said that the resort to criticizing the administration is part of their strategy in fighting back. He said that the war on corruption is unyielding, and the president, having promised Nigerians that he will wage war against corruption, still has his eyes on the war against corruption. Meanwhile, the All Progressive Congress is to meet with the Senate caucus tomorrow. It already met with the House of Rep caucus. This was the Publicity Secretary of the All Progressive Congress, Bolaji Abdullahi. The spokesman for the party says that the party is happy with the president, and they are making initiative, particular initiative concerning the reconciliation meeting led by the vice president. He says that the party is pursuing it, and it has warned all its members to desist from making inflammatory statements that will make a nullity the initiatives towards reconciliation. Meanwhile, a Lagos-based businessman by name Raji Rashid Oyemi has filed a suit at the Federal High Court, Abuja, seeking to nullify the screening of Mr. Ibrahim Magu by the Senate. According to him, he has asked the court to declare that the Senate president and 10 senators being investigated by the EFCC chairman ought not to have participated in the screening. He has asked the court on grounds of conflict of interest to disqualify the Senate process of screening the chairman for the EFCC. He is also seeking the court to declare the purported screening of 15 December as well as that of 15th of March null and void, because it was supposed to have been the work of an appropriate committee of the Senate before it will have come to the plenary. Meanwhile, there are defendants lined up, among who are the Senate President, 10 senators, the Clerk of the National Assembly, the Attorney General of the Federation, as well as the chairman, acting chairman of the EFCC.
All right, Bayo, let's take a quick look now also at the front page of the Guardian newspaper. The Guardian says, and it's lead with a double-decker headline, local airlines lose 39.2 billion naira yearly to expatriates, and says experts seek review of foreign quota and hope rises for 400 unemployed pilots. Now, there are other headlines there, some of them, of course, relating to the landslide, land and mudslides in Colombia. Some 250 persons or more are said to have died. Now, row over nominee as Ocholi's replacement. That's a ministerial nominee. And 3 suicide bombers die in Borno blasts. Now, those are the headlines, Bayo, from the Guardian newspaper.
You're talking about 3 suicide bombers. This happened at Mona at Dusaya village. But there was another suicide attempt which was foiled by a dog. The dog, they say, is a man's friend. This was a suicide bomber, a 17-year-old female, attempting to invade a situation where wedding guests had gathered. This dog, suspecting the suicide bomber, went straight to her and attacked. In the process, the suicide bomber detonated, killing herself and the dog. The community leader, if I could advise, should make a proclamation that nobody should harm a dog in that community.
All right, thank you very much, Bayo. Always a pleasure to have you on the newspaper review segment on Good Morning Nigeria. Hope to see you again tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow will be another day. Thank you.
All right, we'll take a short break now, and when we return, our item for discussion this morning, handling recovered loot. We'll be back in just a moment.
Hear the call of change. Stand up, Nigeria. Change is here and it's going to stay. Change begins with you. Oh yeah, make we go. Go so let the change begin from within. Look at you, Ogerola. Change begins with you and me. Change begins with me. Change begins with me. Change begins with
Coming up, we visit David Daniele. In the 10 months since he appeared on Airtel Touching Lives, his Center for Citizens with Disabilities has gone from strength to strength.
Thank you, Airtel. We are glad that you came.
And for Emmanuel Onyeka, his dream of completing his studies has been dashed. A tragic Okada accident in 2015 had left him an amputee.
From the south-south to the northeast, southeast to the northwest, southwest to the north-central, the Future Assured project and its component, Get Involved, is restoring hope to millions of Nigerian women and children.
We are actually doing a lot under Future Assured, the program of Her Excellency Mrs. Aisha Muhammadu Buhari. And I believe what we are doing so far is impacting positively on the lives of women and children in Nigeria, particularly those in the internally displaced camps across the nation.
Get Involved. Support the Future Assured initiative. Email programs@futureassured.org.ng. Future Assured, promoting and protecting the lives of Nigerian women and children.
All right, welcome back. You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the NTA. This morning we're discussing handling recovered loots. But then to set the tone for our discussion this morning is this background report put together by Omotola Omojola.
The history of governance in Nigeria paints a gloomy picture of corruption and a failed system. It was as though there was no end in sight to the self-centered outlook of those who aspire and eventually made it to positions of service. Analysis indicate that, indeed, they did service to themselves and their generations unborn by looting the commonwealth of Nigerians and left a large population of citizens in abject poverty and infrastructures in terrible states. Key to the All Progressives Congress 2015 general elections sweeping victory and campaign promises made by President Muhammadu Buhari is to fight corruption to a standstill. While many were hopeful for the actualization of the change campaign, the endemic nature of this economically killing vice left many others in doubt of the possibility of a corruption-free Nigeria. Not yet there, but slow and steady, the Buhari administration is proving to the doubtful that it is possible through the recovery of looted funds, even from unbelievable quarters. The Minister of Information announced recently that the federal government, through its whistleblower policy, has recovered some $151 million and another 8 billion naira looted funds. This, he explained, is excluding the $9.2 million allegedly owned by former boss at the NNPC. As of June 2016, government made known that some $10 billion or 3.4 trillion naira had been recovered. By September 2016, the recovered loots were put at a total of 78 billion naira and $3 million. This surely does not cover for asset forfeitures and funds awaiting return from foreign countries. Coming from the point of view of what happened with the Abuja loot, among other recoveries by past administrations, Nigerians have been asking what becomes of these funds, and government has not been silent about injecting it back into the economy. But how will the government go about doing this? What is key and where does it start? Join us on Good Morning Nigeria today as experts discuss, analyze and make recommendations on how to handle these looted funds.
Thank you very much, Motola, for that in-depth background report, because we have with us here in the studios experts, as she had indicated, and persons, of course, who should know what is going on. First, we would like to, at this time, welcome the Attorney General of the Federation and the Honorable Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami, the learned senior advocate of Nigeria. Honorable Minister, a pleasure to have you join us again on Good Morning Nigeria.
My pleasure. Good morning, Nigeria.
And then we also have with us in the studios Professor Abdullahi Shehu. Professor Abdullahi Shehu, of course, is a former Director General of the ECOWAS Intergovernmental Action Group Against Money Laundering, and also a former program expert of the UN Global Programs Against Corruption and Money Laundering. He's also served as a member of the Ad Hoc Committee on the elaboration of the UN Convention Against Corruption, and he was pioneer director of the EFCC Training and Research Institute. His doctorate is on anti-corruption and money laundering, and of course is also an expert on asset recovery. At present, he's a professor of criminology at the National Open University of Nigeria. Professor Abdullahi Shehu, a pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria after a long while.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right.
And also we have with us a regular on the program. He is the Chief Whip of the House of Representatives, and that's no other person than Honorable Alhassan Adu Dogua. Always a pleasure to have you join us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Good morning. It's also my pleasure being here. Good morning, Nigerians.
All right, gentlemen, let's begin this conversation with the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation. As our background report indicated, and as indeed Nigerians do know, from time to time, there are reports in the media about funds that have been recovered from persons who allegedly raided the public treasury. These funds, have been found in all kinds of places, some in septic tanks, so-called soakaway. Some have been hidden in water tanks, some buried amongst plants on farms. At home and abroad, monies are being recovered. And questions are also being asked as to what is happening to the funds. In particular, they say, how come the country is recovering so much without X amount of money, and yet the country is still going or borrowing? What is the status of recoveries from purported looters of the public treasury? Honorable Minister.
Well, the starting point is to take you through the background or foundational history of the asset recovery as far as the Nigerian state is concerned. It may interest you to note that Nigeria as an entity is a member, a signatory to United Nations Convention Against Corruption and Financial Action Task Force, which are the international instruments by which Nigeria subscribes, and then arising from that membership, Nigeria has a responsibility to have in place proceeds of crime management agency. Arising from that understanding, Proceeds of Crime Act was at a point presented before the National Assembly as an executive bill. And then the 7th Assembly has passed it substantially just a day before the termination of the tenure of the 7th Assembly, and was presented for presidential assent. Unfortunately, arising from bureaucratic bottlenecks that set in, the bill was not assented to by the presidency at that level. So arising from those bureaucratic bottlenecks, when this government eventually came into power, the same bill was transmitted back to the National Assembly for reconsideration, considering that the time, statutory time limit within which it could have been assented to by the previous government had elapsed, and the 8th Assembly, before it came into place as well, the statutory time within which it could have exercised the right of veto had equally elapsed. That eventually calls for starting the process all over. At the executive level, our hope then was, considering the fact that the 7th Assembly had indeed passed the bill into law, it could have been accorded a speedy determination. Unfortunately, as it is, that bill has not been passed into law by the 8th Assembly. But what I'm trying to state is, as it is now, Nigeria, as a sovereign nation, as a sovereign state, and a member of United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and indeed a member of the Financial Action Task Force, do not have coordinated recovered asset management agency in place. So you find the management of recovered assets handled substantially by the institutions, agencies that recovered said asset. But if the Proceeds of Crime Act had indeed been promulgated, we could have in place effective asset management agency arising from Section 96 of that bill, which has put in place a composite and comprehensive membership of the agency, and put in place an agency that will be saddled with the responsibility of management of the assets, formulating policies that relates to the asset management, and then associated considerations relating to management of recovered assets.
Attorney General, what you are saying in essence is that in the absence of a legal framework for the management of recovered assets, or shall we say, plain language, recovered loot, all kinds of agencies are currently in possession of such loot. Can we have an idea of such agencies?
Well, starting with my office, the Office of the Attorney General, there are recoveries made, and then those recoveries, as far as the Office of the Attorney General is concerned, are exclusively deposited. I'm talking of the cash assets, for example, are deposited into an account that has been established by the federal government. I am talking of this government when it comes into place, and that account is maintained by the Central Bank of Nigeria, often at the instance of the Federal Ministry of Finance and the Office of the Accountant General, and then all the cash assets are deposited in that account by the Office of the Attorney General. The police, on the other hand, have equally made sizable recoveries, and those recoveries were equally deposited, to my knowledge, in certain accounts. I am not certain whether exclusively the assets recovery account, but then definitely there were deposits made by the police relating to the recovered asset. EFCC has done a sizable number of recoveries, and some of these and the recoveries, to my knowledge, are equally deposited in accounts. And the same thing with DSS, NSA, ICPC, NAFDAC, and in fact, even the recoveries that were made relating to PENCOM, to all those were recoveries that were made. But then some of these institutions, arising from the legal instruments establishing them, I'm talking of the laws on the basis of which they were put in place, were vested with some level of powers as it relates to the management of assets. So what I'm trying to say is this some of these institutions and agencies arising from the law that put them in place were vested with certain responsibilities as it relates to the management of assets. But then it is never coordinated in the sense that the law that ought to have coordinated the management of these assets had not come into play.
Honourable Minister, could we get a conservative amount of all of these funds we're talking about?
Well, you cannot get conservative amount from the Office of the Attorney General exclusively. One, because the Office of the Attorney General is exclusive as far as its recoveries are concerned. Okay. The police, in their own right, are exclusive as far as the recoveries that were made by them is concerned, and the same thing with all other agencies. So I think that responsibility could at best be addressed by the office, by the Federal Ministry of Finance or the Office of the Accountant General, who are naturally the initiators of these accounts, and all the central bank, which institution at the end of the day is the custodian of the funds that eventually gets to it.
Are they forfeitures or they are being contended? Some of them are being contended in courts.
Well, that is where the issues arose, because there are forfeitures, outright forfeitures, final forfeitures, and then there are temporal forfeitures, and then there are equally assets that are due and 100% ready for acquisition of the federal government, arising from the fact that there are no hanging or pending issues relating to them, either by way of litigation or by way of contentions by the parties.
All right, Attorney General of the Federation, thank you very much. We'll come back to you. Just before we bring in the House of Reps member to discuss the legislative perspective, let's get the views of Professor Shehu. Professor Shehu, as it were, we do not have, to use a plain language, a TSA overview of recovered loot, considering the multifarious agencies who are in possession of, or who are trustees of the recovered loot. What does this mean in a sense, and how can we cut through the ticket?
Well, thank you very much. Let me begin by setting the tone of discussion on 6 major principles that will discuss the asset recovery situation in Nigeria. The first is the fact that the philosophy behind asset recovery is to take the benefit away from criminals so that they are not empowered to continue with what they are doing. Not only that, is also to take away negative role models out of society. The second fundamental principle in asset recovery is the general acceptance by the international community that asset recovery is an economic intervention strategy aimed at recovering lost assets that will aid development. And therefore, countries that are seeking to bring back their assets look at it from the perspective of development cooperation. The third principle is the fact that asset recovery has been accepted by the international community as an issue, and as a result of that, the United Nations elaborated a comprehensive convention against corruption, and in Articles 51 to 59 of that convention, there are comprehensive provisions for asset recovery. But most fundamentally is the fact that asset recovery is a fundamental principle of that convention. And as the Attorney General rightly pointed out, Nigeria is a member of the United Nations and has obligation under that convention. The fourth principle, of course, is that when we have accepted to undergo or to undertake asset recovery, there are 2 main routes or 2 main approaches. The criminal route to asset recovery, where you have to secure a conviction before you now demand the assets to be returned to you. Now, this seems to be very difficult, but is not impossible based on our past experience. It had happened in this country. In the case of Alamia Serra, for example, and the companies that were charged in court, they were convicted in Nigeria. And instant upon their conviction, the British government returned assets to Nigeria without Nigeria instituting any proceedings in a British court. At the same time, the civil approach also particularly that one is the one that is more problematic because Nigeria does not have a non-conviction-based asset recovery legislation. But it has also worked in a number of cases. The case of the former governor of Plateau State, Chief Joshua Darie, where he was merely arrested and charged to court here, on account of that, the British authorities instituted a civil proceedings against him, and they recovered some assets, and the assets were sent back to Nigeria. I hope it was given to the state, to the Plateau State. Now, the fifth principle, of course, is the fact that whatever approach we take in asset recovery, it is strictly a legal and bilateral issue. And therefore, it depends on the relationship between state parties. And finally, but perhaps the most important for this discussion, is when assets are recovered, how are they managed? And this is where there is concern in the international community, and also there is pressure from the civil society for a more transparent and open process of managing the asset. I cannot say that maybe the Darie asset that was seized was properly used by the state government, and neither can I say that all assets were properly used, and this is where the concern is. So, coming back to your issue of the TSA, the TSA is quite a good idea. It's not a new thing, but it is a welcome development that this government has implemented it. But it will not solve all the problems arising from the issue
Professor
of the
Shehu, I only use the TSA as a metaphor. Okay. And as I said, just before the full-scale implementation of the TSA, all kinds of MDAs kept various accounts with various banks, commercial and so on and so forth. But with the TSA, with the operation of the TSA, all accounts came, into a single view of the government, so that at a glance, the government knows precisely what is in its coffer. So that's the metaphor that I use to say, look, for recovered loot, we have the police, we have the Office of the Attorney General of the Federation, EFCC, NAFDAC, and all kinds of agencies. So what does it mean that the government, as it were, does not, apparently, at a glance, have a full-scale view of how much it has recovered?
Well, the TSA has nothing to do with recovered assets, even though it has a lot to do with preventing spilling of assets. And besides that, not all institutions have actually keyed into the TSA scheme of the government. When you put an anti-corruption measure in place, you need to put a chain of mechanism to monitor the effectiveness of that, of the system you have put in place. And I think that is what is needed to be done. Basically, as at now, there is complaint that Nigerians do not know exactly how much has been recovered. Again, let us not get confused. The enforcement agencies are flying figures in order to show that they are working, but they have failed to educate Nigerians on the distinction between what is an interim forfeiture and what is a final forfeiture. Of course, they have got both, and their efforts are highly commendable, but we need to make a distinction. For example, if an Attorney General says, okay, he cannot provide a correct statistic of how much is recovered, it is understandable if he is talking for this year. But there should be a system in place where Attorney General of the Federation can say, as of December 31st, 2016, the report reaching me was that this was the amount that was recovered, either final forfeiture or interim forfeiture. It's because of the lack of the coordination in the system, which is the main problem in the Nigerian anti-corruption system, that has created this lacuna. And it is very, very important that a system is put in place to ensure there is effective and efficient coordination of the process from beginning to finish.
All right, Prof, thank you very much. We'll come back to both yourself and the Attorney General of the Federation. Honorable Ado Doguwa, of course, you've listened to the comments, of the two guests, in particular the Attorney General of the Federation, indicating that there were earlier attempts to provide a legal framework for asset recovery management, but that, of course, fell through with a non-assent to the bill when it was passed by the 7th Assembly. Now, what is the status of any bill, if any, currently before the 8th Assembly, and what exactly are we looking at in terms of provision? You may wish to also begin your contribution by making a general comment on what you consider to be the issues pertaining to the handling of recovered loot.
Thank you so much, Kingsley. Let me say once again to Nigerians, good morning. Like you have rightly said, I think there is need for me to start with an overview or a kind of review of the subject matter under discussion. And I want to say, as usual, that the National Assembly is an institution, and a good number of our members in the National Assembly individually are quite, of course, in support of the fight against corruption being championed by the federal government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And under no guise or under no circumstances shall any one of us, as an individual or as an institution, will now set any trap or set against this process of fight against corruption. But like I've always said, one good thing about democracy world over is the fact that it's a system that must be guided by rules. It is a system that has to be guided by a laid down procedure, and most of which these procedures come by way of law, by way of legislation. And in my opinion, as long as we want to succeed in this crusade or this fight against corruption, then certainly we must have to start from the basics. And the basics obviously means a provision of a comprehensive legal framework that will provide answers to most of these questions that you have now raised, which apparently could not be answered. When you are talking of a holistic fight against corruption, as far as I'm concerned, the fact remains that some of the laws we have in existence, especially those laws to do with the establishment of those respective agencies of government that partake in the fight against corruption, are quite skeletal as regards the issue of really addressing how do you go about the process, how do you bring people to book, and what do you do with the recovered loots. So I want to say very clearly, without any fear of contradiction, that the question will continue to remain that we must have to provide a legal framework, and this legal framework obviously has to come from the National Assembly. And it is this legal framework that will provide most of these basic answers. For me, if you talk of recovered loots, for instance, you are talking of loots recovered from wrongful hands. And as long as you have the need to provide a law that will guide how to handle such funds, then certainly it is the absence of this legal framework that unfortunately has subjected these loots into unlawful custody. I call them unlawful because any custody, wherever it is, as long as that custody of such public funds is strange to the provisions of our Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and does not have any legal framework that justifies the stay of such funds in such custodies, for me, it's like you are now discussing an issue that can rightly be said, this is a recovered loot, and yet in another loot. Because the moment such funds stays in undefined custodies that are not defined and acknowledged by our existing laws, then certainly it's like you have no reason keeping them there. You have some loots being handled or in the custody of the EFCC. You have some loots kept in the custody of the Attorney General, with due respect. You have some loots also kept in the hands of the Nigeria Police Force. I don't think there is any provision in any of such acts that establish some of these agencies that has protected them sufficiently to continue to keep these loots while the country is in hunger. You have rightly pointed it out here, a situation whereby Nigeria is in a serious economic recession, and here we are keeping a huge amount of money in volumes in various hands that are not acknowledged by our existing laws, then certainly there is a very big question. So I want to say that what we need to do to answer to some of these key questions you have raised, and what we also need to do to raise the hope of Nigerians, to also raise confidence in the minds of our people that the fight against corruption in Nigeria is going to be wholesome, then is the very big question of waiting or really expediting to create a legal framework that will coordinate and also bring all stakeholders in the fight against corruption on the same page in such a situation whereby this thing will continue to be unwholesome and to be beneficial not only to the government as a political body, but also to the nation as an economy, and at the end of the day, this money can now be ejected. So it's like, let's start from the basics. Provide a comprehensive legal framework which will define very clearly how do we go about it. And unless this is made, then certainly, like I said, it's like you are recovering loot and they are yet kept in custodies that are also unwholesome.
Well, from what you're saying now, it's obvious that the legislation or the National Assembly frowns at, you know, spending such a looted funds. But then is the National Assembly contemplating on implementing laws that could actually ease the use of these funds by government?
I think that is why I said from the onset that the National Assembly as an institution and most of us as individuals have no cause whatsoever to agitate or to undermine the zeal by the government to really fight corruption. We are all 100% in support of this fight. It's a wholesome one. It's a popular program. It's a popular policy, and most especially when Nigeria is also signatory to some of these international codes that fight against corruption. But the fact remains, just like the Attorney General has just stated, there was a submission of an act to be considered by the National Assembly in the 7th Assembly, which, like he has rightly stated, the National Assembly has done its own side. For whatever reason, when a law or an act is passed by the National Assembly, and at the end of the day, that law has not been assented to by the executive arm of government or by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, as it were, in the 7th Assembly, then that cannot be passed back to the National Assembly as a blame. So the blame goes to the executive arm of government, as it were, in the 7th Assembly, and the fact still remains, we have laid down procedure as to how to go about the promulgations of laws. The law was expired because it was not assented to. And within the scope within which such laws would have been granted an expeditious consideration or passage has also technically expired. So the fact now remains the same. We are now faced with a fresh law, as new as any other law. And when you are approached with a fresh law, certainly we will have no reason, no cause to justify an unnecessary expedition of the passage of that law. It's a fresh law, and it has to be subjected to the procedures of lawmaking without any short change. So the fact remains that we are giving the much needed attention to the new law that they have submitted, and the National Assembly, under popular responsibility, under moral responsibility as lawmakers of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, will give this law every consideration so that at the end of the day, we get to a logical conclusion of a passage of a comprehensive law, not only a comprehensive law, but a law that could actually stand the test of time and also be compared with other international laws of its own standard.
All right. Now, Honorable Doguwa, thank you very much. Until we get, shall we say, an omnibus legal framework for the handling of recovered loot, we should have an indication of what is happening to the loot already recovered in possession of various agencies. From the perspective of the Office of the Honorable Minister of Justice and the Learned Attorney General of the Federation, how is recovered loot in the possession of your office being handled? Answer this question against the background also of the issue relating to orders, whether interim or final forfeiture.
Well, as far as the Office of the Attorney General of the Federation is concerned, there is no assets in its custody. That I have to make clear right from the onset. An account has been opened by the Federal Ministry of Finance and the Office of the Accountant General at the instance of the Executive. The account is designed Asset Recovery Account, and then that account is being maintained by the Central Bank and not the Office of the Attorney General. And then whatever recoveries are made by the Office of the Attorney General, particularly in cash, goes directly into the recovered asset account of the federal government. So in essence, the Office of the Attorney General is not in custody of any money or any asset at all. Assets that are recovered by the Office of the Attorney General, cash assets, are deposited directly into an account in the custody of the central bank, operated and maintained at the instance of the Federal Ministry of Finance. So that is what I can clearly state as far as the assets recovered by the Office of the Attorney General is concerned. If you are talking of the EFCC, for example, the EFCC Act, the relevant legislation made provision as it relates to management of assets, that is under interim forfeiture, final forfeiture, and associated things. The same thing with other agencies of government. So what I'm saying, what is clearly lacking is a coordinated legal framework. The coordinated legal framework has been provided in the Proceeds of Crime Act by the Executive and forwarded to the National Assembly for passage. But then, considering the fact that no such promulgation had eventually materializes in terms of assent by the Executive, that coordinated approach that is necessary and required, which now vests the responsibility of managing and administering the recovered asset through a centralized agency. Because what the Proceeds of Crime Act intends to do is to put in place an agency that will be responsible for the general management of assets recovered by all ministries, departments, and agencies of government. That is what we are lacking now, arising from the fact that the Proceeds of Crime Act has not been passed to law.
All right. Honorable Attorney General, can we have an insight into some of the provisions in the bill with regard, for instance, that to the composition? I'm asking this question, as you very well know, we're on a federal system. You have the national and then sub-national governments. So what is unique about the proposed agency for the management of recovered assets?
What is unique and special about the Proceeds of the Proceeds of Crime Act as it relates to assets management agency is the fact that a legal framework has been put in place. For example, as it relates to the composition of the agency, there is a chairman who must have at least 20 years cognate experience to be appointed by the presidency. The Office of the Attorney General is represented by a director. The police are represented. Economic and Financial Crimes Commission are represented. NAFDAC is represented. Federal Ministry of Finance is represented. And a lot of other agencies of government, inclusive of the civil society groups that are entitled to ex officio member who must have a cognate experience in the recovery of assets and its management. So what I'm trying to say in essence, that it is an agency that envisages a comprehensive participation of both the executive, the legislature, and associated agencies of government and civil societies, the essence of which is to ensure transparency, accountability, and indeed efficient and effective management of recovered assets. So that coordinated agency envisaged by the Act, clearly Section 96 of the Act makes that provision as it relates to composition, but then arising from the fact that the law has taken time to come in place, that is why we are witnessing what we are witnessing in terms of the fact that, yes.
But then, is this agency going to be a permanent one or just...
It's going to be a permanent
and of course, would this not be more bureaucracy? Would this not cost government more money?
Well, whether it costs government more money, the anticipatory basis for having the agency in place is the fact that it remains for good and it makes money for the government, both nationally and internationally. Whatever assets is recovered nationally and internationally is going to be managed through a process that has as well been captured by the law.
All right, Professor Shehu, what can we learn from other jurisdictions with regard to management of recovered loot? Let's be specific. Recovered loot. I mean, we know that it's assets.
Well, the idea of having the Proceeds of Crime Act is a welcome development, but the honourable member did not confirm to us whether the bill is before the Parliament, before the National Assembly, or not. Now, the last version that was discussed, I attended the public hearing, and there are controversial provisions in the bill. For example, about 20 sections of the NDLA Act will be repealed. About 17 or more of the EFCC Act will be repealed. And quite a good number of the EFCC, of the ICPC Act will also be repealed by implication. So to me, it is a bit controversial. It needs to be looked at again before it can be presented for passage into law. Now, coming to the main issue.
Sorry, could you just explain what you mean could you explain your concern about the proposed repeal of the consequential proposed repeal of those provisions? Will those provisions to be expunged render those agencies almost ineffectual?
Certainly.
Dealing with asset management?
Certainly, it will. And it will not even promote better coordination, in the sense that the agencies were resisting, even though during the public hearing, they were scared of the Office of Attorney General and therefore did not come out openly to say their minds. But my discussion with them revealed that they were resisting. This is just the main thrust of that. Now, with regard to what we can learn in other jurisdictions, the first thing is, if you have anti-corruption as the main thrust of, one of the main thrusts of your government, you need to develop a strategy that is evidence-based, is comprehensive, is integrated, is impact-oriented, and non-partisan. We have been calling for a strategy. Up till now, Nigeria has no anti-corruption strategy. So if you don't have an anti-corruption strategy, then it means like you are a pilot flying a plane and you may not get the proper direction because you don't have a good compass. There was a draft anti-corruption strategy, I think, that has been pending. I do not know where it is in government. It is within the framework of the anti-corruption strategy that you will now develop an asset recovery management framework, which would outline the procedures for management of assets, for recovery in the first place of assets, whether they are domestic or international, and then who is responsible for doing what. Ultimately, with due respect, the Office of the Attorney General is responsible for this overall coordination. And if that coordination is not done, agencies will be operating in silos, and then the results will not be what Nigerians desire. There are many examples in other countries where assets have been recovered and managed, and Nigerian officials have been taken on a number of study tours. When I was the Regional Director General in Jaba, I took a number of staff involved in asset recovery in other jurisdictions, and we even promoted the creation of an asset recovery authority under the departments of the Attorney General of our ECOWAS countries. Some have done, some have not. So this is a model that can be applied. The Commonwealth is also assisting countries that in the event that you don't have an agency, you can establish a unit under the Department of the Attorney General to deal with that. That is done in many Anglophone countries. In the French-speaking jurisdictions also, they have their own system where they manage it according to their own law, because you know in the French system it's a civil law jurisdiction. So they have their own system, but it's not far apart from what is obtained in the English-speaking countries.
Well, I'd like the Honourable Minister to actually react to what he just said now, that we don't have an anti-corruption strategy.
Well, the truth of the matter about this strategy, there exists a committee that is working on anti-corruption strategy and action plan. It has been developed, and as I'm talking to you, the panel draft of it has been circulated among the agencies of government responsible for anti-corruption drive, ICPC, EFCC, and associated agencies, and indeed the Presidential Advisory Committee on Anti-Corruption, among others, have come together and are working on a panel draft. What I'm trying to what I think is equally important as far as the strategy is concerned, is having in place a legal framework. Ordinarily, it is the legal framework, the law, that could be the basis for the final and conclusive formulation of anti-corruption strategy, because the law usually serves as a guide as to what should be accommodated within the strategy and action plan and what should ordinarily not be accommodated. But that, in essence, does not mean to say that there is a clear absence. Sorry? There is a clear absence of a policy or understanding, notwithstanding the fact, notwithstanding the absence of the legal framework, the legislative instrument which is pending before the National Assembly. We are working in that direction on on a focused understanding as it relates to the recovered assets, by way of ensuring that accountability and transparency sets into its recovery and accommodation, and sets into its recovery and management as well.
All right. Elected Attorney General of the Federation, thank you very much. Let's return to Honorable Adodogu. The question has been posed whether indeed the 8th Assembly is in possession of the process of crime bill for consideration and passage, considering what happened to it in the 7th Assembly. What is the status?
Thank you for this very good question. Let me say very clearly that yes, the National Assembly is in receipt of this act by the executive arm of government, both in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. And like I've earlier said, the two chambers, while they operate separately, we still have to harmonize in whatever we do. And I also want to say, because of our shared desire to also key in effectively into this fight against corruption by the executive arm, or by the executive arm of government, or by the present administration of Muhammadu Buhari, had also gingered so many members coming up with so many bills and acts, private member bills, that are also geared towards actualizing and really perfecting this process of fight against corruption. And it is indeed in the light of these various other bills coming from other hands of the members of the National Assembly that we need to take very good time, so that at the end of the day we harmonize all these components, all these other things coming in either from the executive arm of government or coming in from the private member perspective, so that at the end of the day we don't come up with a law that will be conflicting. Also take it from me that based on some other acts passed by the National Assembly, maybe establishing some of these agencies, certainly this is like a kind of a broad-based law that has to now look at the possibility of harmonizing activities or interrelationship between various agencies that are involved in the fight against corruption. But whatever you say, Kingsley, whatever you talk about all these things, the question still remains one, and there is just no two-way about it. We need a legal framework, and I want to also clearly disagree with the Attorney General of the Federation, with due respect, that what is lacking in our society now, or what is lacking in the polity as regards the fight against corruption, is not only the absence of an institution or an agency that coordinates the whole process. It is also lacking in the process the modus operandi. The modus operandi of the whole fight against corruption is also lacking.
What do you mean?
It is not. What I mean is that this grand fight against corruption, which is also so much loved by the people, cannot be achieved through policy agenda alone. It cannot also be achieved through a strategy. Strategies are all issues or instruments of government that must have to be backed up by a legal framework. So whatever you talk about this thing, the question still remains that where do we operate from? And the only operating platform is for us to have a holistic legal framework that defines virtually every aspect of the fight against corruption. Let me give you this example. For instance, the whistleblowing policy or the whistleblowing agenda is one component, very interesting component of the fight against corruption. Where is this whistleblowing accommodated in our laws? It is strange. It is even not only unnecessarily overheating the economy and the policy, but it is something that at a point you have not even defined specifically that when a whistle is blown, for instance, where do you get from there? And when you want to blow a whistle, where do you go to blow your own whistle? To the office of the Attorney General, to the police force or to the EFCC or any other agency that is involved in the fight against corruption. So what I'm trying to say in essence is that what is absent in our polity now as far as the fight against corruption is concerned is the absence of a holistic legal framework that must have to start from A, the commencement of the fight, the modus operandi, process of pursuing it, whether by way of forfeiture, whether by way of going to the court, and at the end of the day, someone is adjudged to have looted, and such funds are recovered. So we must have to wait and give the National Assembly sufficient time to go through this submission of the executive and harmonize this submission by the executive arm of government with some of the existing drives and agitations from member contributions arising from private member bills, so that at the end of the day, you have a law that is all-encompassing.
Honorable Doguwa, from your perspective, would the establishment of special anti-corruption courts be a good idea?
Of course, it will be a good idea. Very good, because the fight against corruption itself is a special crusade. It is something that could be said to be so unprecedented, especially with the kind of passion this present federal government is pursuing it with. I want to believe, if you want to really succeed, that every aspect of it has to be set, and I don't think it's going to be out of order if we contemplate establishing a special court or establishing a special agency like is being suggested by the Attorney General of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, that yes, this fight has to be fought specially. But the National Assembly as an institution will always be there for the executive, not only to key in, but we will partner in progress to make sure that this fight against corruption succeeds.
But then right now as we speak, the new legal framework, is it before the House?
Of course I said it is. It is. But under no circumstances shall we now fast-track unnecessarily or expedite our process of making laws, because we have other existing legal attempts by private members, of course, trying to back up the executive drive to fight against corruption. And certainly, to succeed in doing that, we must have to look every aspect of it, so that at the end of the day, no stone is left unturned. We have the zeal, we have the commitment, and we have the moral responsibility to partner with the executive arm of government to succeed in the fight against corruption. And that we can only achieve if we can also subject whatever need or whatever executive submission to the legal, to the laid down rules of lawmaking, so that at the end of the day, you don't arrive at creating or promulgating conflicting laws for the country to work with.
All right, Honorable Al-Hassan Ado Doguwa, Chief Whip, House of Representatives, would like to thank you for being part of our discussion this morning.
Thank you so much.
Just before we go on a short break, for the benefit of some of our viewers, well, in the past, this country has witnessed, or rather had witnessed, asset forfeiture of certain former public officers. We saw that after the overthrow of the Gowon regime in 1975. We also saw that after the collapse of the Second Republic. That was post-December 31st, 1983. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll take the reactions from our viewers who are sending their tweets, and then we'll still have the Attorney General of the Federation, as well as Professor Abdullah Ishio with us. Another guest will also be joining the conversation.
Vote for me, and I will turn night into day.
Vote me, I will ban for more importation. Everybody will start eating turkey and chicken.
Put me in power, and I will bring winter to West Africa.
I will turn all the taxi into plane.
Campaign promises. Another hilarious episode of Professor John Bull, your rib-cracking comedy. Find out the true gist of election violence, betrayals, and promises as Olani goes head-to-head with Udo.
You have money. Who you mean?
Showing at 8:30 p.m. every Tuesday and Friday on NTA Network International and Star Times.
By the time I become the chairman, I will make you my special advisor.
Why not go making me money advisor?
What is wrong with you, my daughter? That is why people will look at politicians as thieves.
Over and out.
Brought to you by Glow.
Welcome to the new speed.
Chewing gum neutralizes bad odor. It doesn't just disguise them, it gives you real minty breath.
how to set our goals and achieve it.
I like my school because they have qualified teachers. I like my school because our teacher teach very well.
I like my school because they have high standard in teaching.
This is the new Imo State, where education is free. The Imo Rescue Mission. Imo must be better.
Hi guys, look how my baby Jamil has grown. And as they grow, there's a worry we all share, skin rash. Some use lotions or petroleum jelly, but I found what works for Jamil is Nigerian Pampers. It has built-in lotion to help protect his delicate skin and keep him dry. See you in the morning, Jam Jam. Good morning, happy Jam Jam. Dry and soft and no sign of a rash. Join many other moms and try Nigerian Pampers with lotion. Let's beat the rash.
All right, you're welcome back. But if you just joined us, it's Good Morning Nigeria. We are reaching you live on the network service of Africa's largest television network, the Nigerian Television Authority. We still have the Attorney General of the Federation, Professor Abdullahi Shehu of the National Open University, a criminologist and expert, of course, in money laundering and anti-corruption. We're being joined now by another guest, Mr. Tokwe Faswa. He's an economist. Mr. Faswa, a pleasure to have you join us on the program this morning.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, just before we pop our first question to you, we want to give time and attention now to our viewers who have sent in their tweets. Suleiman Zuntu tweets, says, with the recovered funds, the widening gap in public infrastructure should, of course, be bridged.
And this one is from Otega Esemude. It says, we hope the recovered loots and the funds will not be relooted again. All we hear is recovered monies on the media.
And then Muhammadu Jamiu Sadara tweets, now the funds, of course, should not be relooted, and government should be transparent by carrying the masses along in the business of accountability.
Dele Jackson tweets, first, federal government must give ears to public opinion on what it should do with the recovered or looted money and use them judiciously.
And Blessed Ima tweets, I think this looted money that is yet to be accounted for to Nigerians by this administration is the cause of the problem between the executive and legislature.
And Suleiman Zutu tweets, the procedures associated to releasing of this fund seek to eliminate the tendencies that the receiving country will fail to utilize it.
Ibrahim Tudu tweets, even the assets under litigation can be temporarily put to use by assembly resolution. We must channel the money for development.
And Dele Jack Swing tweets, indeed, if indeed there are recoveries, government should look at social schemes that could reduce the hardship of the people right now.
Now we have this from Innocent Yawa James. Looted fund is public fund, therefore it is meant for the welfare of the citizens. It should be injected into key transformative programs of the federal government.
And Ibenem Dominic tweets, we know nothing about recovered loots and what happens to the looters. Federal government should tell us the looters, amounts and projects that it is spending it on.
Now we have this from Imali Onogo. Imali Onogo, such funds, that's looted funds, should be returned to the different agencies from where the money was looted and monitored to the fullest in terms of utilization.
And this one is from Umar S. Meina. He says, please, Attorney General, fight corruption as you people promised us in your campaign. Why can't you prosecute those in power?
And then we have this from Festus Akimboyewa. He said, we will feel a sense of justice if eminent Nigerians manage and spend recovered loot on basic necessities of life of ordinary Nigerians.
Anduaka Veshima tweets, the transparency in the recovered assets can help suggest what to do with the assets. They should intimate us on how much is recovered so far, please.
Tunde Emmanuel tweets, interagency rivalry is a major challenge, and that's responsible for why there has been no coordination of the management of recovered loot.
And Dominic Olga tweets, I'm glad to see a criminologist, a criminology professor talking on corruption. I urge the federal government to recruit more criminologists into our security agencies.
Festus Akimboyewa again. If the Attorney General doesn't know the amount recovered so far, how are we sure there will be efficient, accountable and transparent use of recovered funds?
And frankly, in a former tweet, the presidency should divulge how much was recovered and the names of the looters. That will show his walking his talk on transparency.
We have this one from Runkeb Elinju Ege. Why can't a single account be opened titled recovered loot? And at a point, one can say this is the amount recovered so far.
And this one is from Sani Michael Imokoji. He tweets, if the law says we can use the money now, why declaring the amount recovered even when the court hasn't decided? And those are the tweets that we're taking for now. You can continue to tweet at us at NTAGMN.
All right, as Rhoda just indicated, we have a number of tweets. We hope we're able to take them before we wrap up this conversation. Mr. Faswa, welcome once again to the conversation. I'm sure you had the benefit of listening to the lawmaker, the Attorney General, the Chief Law Officer of the Federation, and the Professor of Criminology. Now, what's your take on this from the perspective, as some Nigerians have indicated also in their tweets, that, look, the country is hard up for funds, and yet we have recovered loot. We'll be mentioning hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of naira, and yet the country is going a borrowing.
Thank you very much. As you know, I'm an economist, and well, when you talk about the law, I'm a layman, so I'm going to speak for the people on the streets, the layman, the average Nigerian, and our expectations. If we go to the beginning of all of this in recent times, in 2015, we voted a new government in. We had a lot of high hopes. I'm not saying we still don't have hopes, but where we thought that things would be a lot brisker. As a matter of fact, I recall the kind of issues some of us on the streets gave to the former President Jonathan when he decided to go down the route of legalism, in saying that whether he's criticized from heaven to hell, he will never declare his asset because the law says he doesn't have to. And some of us were of the opinion that beyond the law comes morality. That sometimes, you want to do things to lay the right principle, to lay the right procedure, to lay the right example. I remember then I actually did say that people don't wake up in the morning and begin to preach to their children from the Constitution of the Federal Republic. If you're a Christian, you open the Bible for them. If you're a Muslim, you open the Quran. And you teach them morality and say the right thing to do, like they would say. It's about doing the right thing, not necessarily doing things right. So we felt that with the new government and with President Muhammadu Buhari and his sterling reputation for anti-corruption, that things will move a lot brisker, and we would actually begin to see a lot of salutary incidences in the country. So we didn't go down the route of law. We were just looking up to our leaders and said, please, we were pleading. Again, it is said that the best disinfectant in the world is sunlight. And I personally have advised this government, well, in my writings, I'm a columnist in a few places, to please make all of these things very open and very quickly. Because, Nigerians are also quite feisty people. If you don't move fast and you are not very, very exceptionally transparent, one day you will be shocked at the kind of allegations that will come. And I think we have actually moved full circle, and we're at the point now where not only have we not revealed to the Nigerian public, as promised, what we have recovered as loot, in spite of the fact that in the very first few months of this regime, there was a lot of trauma in terms of the kind of figures that people were hearing. All of these figures, somebody stole $90 billion here, 100 billion naira there, 300 billion. And we were seeing a lot of that in the news. And all of these things, there's a way they register, it makes people begin to despair. And indeed, almost all of these amounts were true. Now, a lot of people are now hiding under legalisms. We're getting to a point now where the average Nigerian who is even caught in the act quickly rushes to court. And of course, the honorable member that was right where I was just now made a lot of points, but I start to worry if we say that, if we don't get the legislation in place, we can't even move. It's just like saying that we needed to have had a legislation in place before we go after these people who have looted the country. Sometimes you have to start something without knowing where it's going to end, but always do the right thing. So the point is that if indeed they are forfeited loot, like someone suggested, there's no reason why we can't have a pool. like the TSA, a different kind of TSA, where you dump everything and the figure can always be assessed at every time. Instead of some hanging in the police, some in the EFCC, some with the, Honorable Attorney General, and so on. So that's the thing. I think that the government, unfortunately, what's going on now, we may see a scenario where the war may actually be lost. We'll win a few battles. We may actually lose the corruption war.
All right, Mr. Fasua, thanks a lot for your perspective. Attorney General of the Federation, let's take a look at this, because earlier I hinted at the subnational governments under our federal system. In instances of restitution, who is the ultimate beneficiary of recovered loot? I ask this question because, as you very well know, various agencies, can prosecute whether a local government chairman, who's at the subnational level, a state governor, as we have seen. Now, if monies are recovered from these persons, say at the subnational level, who gets to keep the funds? Who gets to utilize the funds, and for whose benefit? If the money is from, say, a federal agency, we've seen some instances of some of the former service chiefs. I don't know whether these ones are already final or interim forfeiture orders. Some of the buildings recovered from them, they are said to have already been assigned for offices. Vehicles are wasting assets. We're not quite sure what is being done to those vehicles. Who is the ultimate beneficiary of recovered loot? Does it go into the Federation account to be distributed amongst, the recipients of handouts from the Federation account, or it goes to the agency or to the state or the national level or the subnational level from where the money was originally pilfered?
Well, where the money goes, or the recovered asset goes, eventually is a function of multiple factors. It depends, for example, on the law on account of which the funds were recovered. Is it a federal, state? Is it a federal or a state law? It is equally a function of the decision of the court. What was the eventual order of the court arising from the determination of the suit or a case that is pending before the court? So it's not an issue in respect of which you can give a clear-cut conclusion, because a lot of factors comes into play. The law on the basis of which the forfeiture was made, the judicial determination of a court, and consequential orders arising therefrom. But then, the way and manner recovered loots, and indeed any other loots, are applied equally depends on additional factors. For example, in the 2017 appropriation, recovered loots constitute a factor for servicing of the budget, for example. Okay. It's clear in our budget that there are anticipations as to amount that is expected to be recovered relating to looting, anyway. And then, if eventually there exists a court order forfeiting an amount to the federal government, then it is not out of place, arising from the fact that the looted funds are factored into the budget servicing, that the amount could be applied in the budget. That definitely depends on the appropriation by the National Assembly. And then if the National Assembly eventually appropriates or passes the budget, and then the budget contemplates the application of the looted funds, it is not out of place to factor the looted funds into the servicing of the budget. So there is no clear-cut generalized position one can adopt, but it all depends on the circumstances. The budget is a law passed by the National Assembly, and then if the looted funds are factored into the servicing of the budget, then applying the fund through the transparent and accountable process is not out of place. So the same thing, if the judgment of the court is categorical that this amount should be repatriated to a ministry, department, agency, or a state, for example, it goes without saying that that amount must naturally, in compliance with the judgment of the court, goes to the stated ministry, department, agency of the state or local government for that matter. So it is not a clear-cut function of the universal application, but it all depends on the prevailing circumstances, factoring the law, factoring the judgment and associated consideration to mind.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Professor Shehu, let's look at other crimes when monies are recovered like this. How are they used?
Well, normally it varies.
Okay.
In the UK, for example, there is an arrangement, and in America also, where the law enforcement benefit a certain percentage of recovered asset, criminal assets. In our own case, it has been a very big challenge getting this through, because it's a constitutional provision that all monies, all recoveries must go into the consolidated revenue account of the government. And therefore, it has been very, very difficult to amend this. And it has been the case with many jurisdictions around the world, especially those with the common law. The Attorney General has said it all with respect to how it is dispensed with in Nigeria. But one point I just like to add is the fact that the Criminal Justice Administration Act is a very powerful tool, and it can be used. I think there is a section in it that deals with victim compensation. That is also taken into account when the judgments are delivered with respect to recovered assets.
Well, Professor Shehu, still with you. Why is it that it's apparently, a huge challenge for Nigeria to get foreign countries to cooperate in repatriating, looted assets?
Well, as we stated at the beginning of this discussion, you see, you cannot just say, okay, we have 100 million in social jurisdiction, bring it back to us. They will ask you, is it your money? Yes, it's your money. Prove that it's your money. Then you say somebody stole the money. Then they ask you, what have you done to the person that stole the money? He said, we have not punished him, we have punished him. And that is why I cited the example of the late Chief Alamia Seya, for example. He was arrested, investigated, and prosecuted in Nigeria, and himself and those companies that were charged were convicted. Just upon that conviction in Nigeria, the British government released assets owned by him and those companies in that jurisdiction. So it is not as simplistic as saying that, yeah, it is our asset, just bring it back to us. The Honorable Attorney General indicated that Nigeria has signed and ratified the Anti-Corruption Convention, meaning that we have to comply with the provision of that constitution by way of seeking for mutual legal assistance. Incidentally, Nigeria has no mutual legal assistance law in place. There has been a bill, I don't know the stage of that bill. So when you are negotiating with countries, on what basis are you negotiating for the recovery of your asset? You must have an instrument upon which you rely upon. And as far as the criminal route of recovery is concerned, is for you to indicate that, yes, this money was stolen and the person who stole the money has been punished appropriately under your law before you now say, okay, bring the proceeds back to us. Of course, there have been good practices, I can say, in some jurisdictions, like the Abuja recovery that Nigeria made from Switzerland. It was a best practice that can be used in some jurisdictions, but it was an exceptional one because the Swiss authorities applied some ingenuity in the application of their legislation in order for them to redeem their own image and say, okay, they have returned the money to Nigeria. So that was successful. But how many of such cases have we had? In any case, that is why you find that until today, apart from the Abacha loot that were recovered, we have not had of any significant recovery from other countries. The countries are committed under the same instruments Nigeria is committed, whether it is the United Nations Convention or is the FATF recommendations, they're all committed. But you have to follow a procedure. The main problem is actually in Nigeria. And the problem is the fact that you have to undertake a successful prosecution. And a successful prosecution is a function of good investigation. If you don't investigate your cases very well, you go to court, you will not achieve anything. And with the good investigation, you also need good prosecution to bring out the evidence and prove that, yes, this is the case. It is not impossible to do. It's just that we have been facing challenges and we have failed to come to the reality. And despite the passage of the Criminal Justice Act, which I consider to be a very powerful instrument, we have not made significant progress over the years with dealing with those cases.
Attorney General of the Federation, is it a problem in your perspective or in your view that the fight against corruption now would appear to be, a federal offense? Will it help in the prosecution of corruption cases, if state governments or state agencies could also engage, in prosecuting the persons alleged to have, had their hand in the public till?
Well, the truth of the matter about collaboration between the state and federal government as far as the fight against corruption is concerned is that there exists a collaboration that is being put across and that has been indeed accommodated by the states. Of recent, I think about a month or so ago, pursuant to a joint collaborative meeting between the Attorney General of the Federation and the Attorneys General of the states, the Attorney General of the Federation had developed a fiat for the Attorneys General in all the states across the nation to prosecute on behalf of the federal government those federal offenses, particularly offenses relating to corruption and associated breaches and infractions. So what I'm saying is the impediment, if any, as it relates to fighting corruption down the ladder has been eliminated by the investiture of the fiat by the Office of the Attorney General, which has now been extended down to the state level. So arising from that, I can comfortably state that the desired collaboration and cooperation in the fight against corruption as it relates to the federal and state has now been interwoven and consolidated. So, yes.
All right, thank you very much, Leonard, Attorney General of the Federation. Well, we'll take some of the tweets that we're getting now, and after that, we'd like to just get your parting shots very, very briefly. The very first tweet we have here is from Asani Michael Imokoji. He says, our sense of patriotism has been greatly damaged, else we don't need to be paid via whistleblowing before we can give useful information.
And then we have this from Cecilia Okoroma. It says, recovered loot should be used to specifically provide houses at cheap rates for all. The estates should be tagged Looters Loot Estate.
And Aliyu Mustafa tweets, yes, it's a welcome idea, but National Assembly must have to revisit executive bill before them in that respect.
And Sunday Michael Amakojil again says the arms of the law, that's to say, arms of government, handling this recovery should stop politicking and administrative bureaucracy so as to give urgent judgment. All right, so those are the tweets that we are taking from our viewers. Of course, we're pressed for time. Tokwe Fashwa, what will be your closing thoughts? I mean, you've indicated already, what is required to be done very briefly on the basis of what has been said. A lot of work is going on. Some legal framework is being put in place and, recovery, but we don't have, a good overview of what is in the kitty.
Thank you very much. Again, I speak as an economist and a layman to the law. This is beyond legalism. It's beyond even the law. Just as you have seen, the professor mentioned the CJA, Criminal Justice Act, is supposed to be a great instrument. But what I've seen in the law is that many times, even when the law is there, lawyers can find a way of circumventing and bringing up a lot of issues. And when that begins to happen, the people continue to suffer. And therefore, that's why I said this issue is beyond just what the legal aspect is. There's an economic aspect. There's a people aspect as well. Number two, that there's an urgency of now. There's an urgency of the moment. This country cannot be going to borrow $30 billion when we have all of this money is here. And, you know, and we can't be talking about there's no money to pay salaries of people who are working in government and beyond, and even contractors. And lastly, I'll talk about the waste. In the House of Reps, one of the honorables also brought up the issue of this is beyond even money. If you go to EFCC and all of these other agencies, up to federal safety, there are thousands of cars that have been seized and are rotting away, and we will budget for car purchases every year. This year, 2017, the budget for new cars in the federal budget alone is 20 billion naira. And across the state, you find another 100 billion or close to 200 billion being budgeted for cars. So I think we can't afford this waste, and there's nowhere in the world that this is done. So I hope our government actually, you know, has a change of mind. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Tokbe Fatuwa, an economist and an analyst. We thank you for joining us on Good Morning Nigeria today.
You're welcome. All
right, we'll also love to thank Professor Abdullahi Shehu. Thank you for joining us this morning on Good Morning Nigeria. And finally, would love to thank the Attorney General of the Federation and the Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami, SAN. Thank you for coming on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
All right, now it's time for us to take our companion segments. Let's begin with sports.
In the results of the Week 17 encounter of the Nigerian Stroke Flight League on Sunday,